Good afternoon and good morning to all of you. It's a pleasure, it's a privilege for the Department of English and Comparative Literary Studies, Saurashtra University, Rajkot, India, to welcome Dr. Maria Hrikova from the Department of English and American Studies, Constantine, the Philosopher University in Nitra, Slovakia. For the people who are listening for the first time, many of you might be knowing or might not be knowing, last month, in the month of May, on the 6th of May, there was a formal memorandum of understanding between the Department of English, Saurashtra University, Rajkot, India, and the Department of English at the Constantine, the Philosopher University in Nitra, Slovakia, coordinated from that side by Dr. Maria and with efforts from this side by myself and helped by my entire department, my colleagues in the department, students and alumni members. One of the first things we decided that according to this pandemic situation and the work which must go on meaningfully was online lectures of interest primarily to students and research fellows of both the departments in India and Slovakia. This is the first online talk under the MOU. However, Dr. Maria was very quick enough to take the MOU before this formal session today, when he invited Professor Kamal Mehta, senior faculty in our department, to be a reviewer for one of her students, PhD students, for the PhD work. So in a way, the memorandum of understanding, the work has already started rolling, and we are very happy to declare this formally in this meeting, for which I once again not only thank Dr. Maria and her department, her head of the department, but her entire university, the authorities of the entire university, including the provost there, and those people who have made this MOU possible. Coming to the talk today, coming to Dr. Maria. Dr. Maria has been in the Department of English and American Studies, Constantine, the Philosopher University in Nitra, Slovakia, since 2005. We have mentioned that in our poster also. Her interests, besides literature in English, American literature, is also interdisciplinary studies, as you have made out. And she was awarded with the American Fellowship, SUSI Fellowship in 2011. Among her many achievements, that was the year when both of us came in contact. We discovered a like-mindedness in our academic pursuits. And since then, off and on, we have kept in touch with each other. And we since then decided that if this kind of a personal collaboration can be expanded into a collaboration that would in a way benefit our both universities and places, then we would be probably in some small way contribute to our discipline. With these words, I welcome with one small, very happy noting that the title of the talk today that Dr. Maria has chose has this interesting word alchemy in it. Now, the word alchemy connotes a kind of a pursuit for refinement. And in the context of reading, writing, thinking about literature, we all actually, it is the mandate of literature and criticism to refine the taste of the people. It is the mandate of literature and criticism to contribute to the society. Whatever people might think that literature has become pretty marginalized, pretty useless, we in the discipline do sincerely believe and strongly believe that refinement of taste and one kind of an internal shaping of the human being does happen with literature and thinking about literature, that is criticism. So I'm really interested in this word alchemy, which actually in our discipline, it is not just the literal word of turning base metal into gold, but there is a refinement that is included. So I welcome Dr. Maria with this very, very interesting topic of the alchemy in it. There is the literary pilgrimage in it, about which we will come to know. And there are canonical writers like Virginia Woolf, Sylvia Plath, and the Bronte sisters. So overall, as we have now in this platform itself exceeded 55 plus members, and I think all those who are interested have joined, and there are people on Facebook Live also. On behalf of this Department of English and Comparative Literary Studies, Saurashtra University, Rajkot, I once again feel very happy and privileged to invite Dr. Maria Hrikova for her talk. Dr. Maria.
Thank you, Sanjay, for this lovely introduction. You mentioned many things that I would like to mention in my presentation, but it's important that we repeat certain things because they are vitally important in literature studies. So, dear students and colleagues, it's really my great pleasure to share my thoughts about literature with you today. I feel honored to address such a lovely audience, and my great thanks must go definitely to Professor Sanjay Mukherjee for this kind opportunity. I want to say that I'm really glad that our department has opened an intense collaboration with the Department of English and Comparative Literature Studies at your university, and I'm sure our cooperation will be very fruitful and mutually enriching. With my today's talk begins a series of reciprocal lectures for students and researchers of our institutions, and I'm taking this as a unique opportunity to introduce myself and my approach to literature. After this talk, I hope to hear more about your views on the topic I'll be speaking about, but you'll be very welcome to express any ideas related to books and reading. I'll try to share my screen now. All right. And I would like to know whether you can see the presentation.
Yes, it is there now.
Yes. Yeah, I can't see myself. Can you see me also?
We can see you as well as your screen too.
Oh, okay, good, very good. So I'll start. This talk contains basically everything I like about reading and teaching literature. First, I've been always interested in life stories and biographies of authors, and my today's talk is centered on two of them. A great English modernist, Virginia Woolf, and an enigmatic American poetess, Sylvia Plath. Second, I love poetry, and I strongly believe that poetry has the power to change us, to change the way how we see the world and how we see ourselves. So my talk will also include a poem. And thirdly, I think about myself primarily as a teacher, not as a researcher. So you may notice some teaching stuff in between the lines, but I'm a teacher of future teachers, and this naturally reflects my work and environment and interests. I know that we're living in the world of short attention span, and a 60-minute lecture may be too overwhelming. So I'll try not to speak longer than 45 minutes, and I'll be glad if we had a longer discussion afterwards. Although this session is primarily meant to be a lecture, I'll be very happy to learn something from you also. So please feel free to join the discussion later. While we were discussing the philosophy of our lectures with Dr. Mukherjee, we agreed that they would be for a wider audience, teachers, scholars, and students. To prepare the presentation that would meet the expectations of such diverse community is quite demanding and difficult, but I do hope that each of you will find something in it that you will reflect upon or think about. My talk's title is The Alchemy of Literary Pilgrimage, and you may rightfully ask, what has alchemy to do with literature and literary places? What has the medieval forerunner of chemistry, which is concerned with the transmutation of matter and which seeks to convert base metals into gold with literature? My title is, of course, figurative. Alchemy is always related to the process of transformation, creation, and combination. Art and alchemy have, in this sense, much in common. I'm sure that some of you are familiar with an interesting Spanish-Mexican artist of the 20th century, Remedios Varo. One of her surrealist paintings that I like to show to my students is called Creation of the Birds. This work of art, I think, very nicely shows how any work of art is being created. The central figure is that of a woman owl creature who is painting birds. She produces an image, but what an image? A 3D image turned alive. She creates art that is alive, but in order to achieve that, many ingredients are needed. She, of course, needs some materials to work with, and some alchemical instruments are involved also. And in the picture, the liveliness of creation much depends on the light coming from outside, but there is also a thread which goes from her heart to her work. Our hearts must be involved, suggests Remedios Varo in her painting. And those of you who create art, those of you who write poetry or stories, those of you who paint or play any musical instrument would surely agree. Creation of the work of art in the picture is represented as an act of transformation. And for those of us who are not that gifted in creating art, art itself brings the remedy, as perception of art per se is a transformative activity. Good art should change us. For me, the evidence that work of art is of high quality is when the work changes me, that it creates a direct impact on my view of things, on the way I behave towards other people. Two great minds of the world literature, the 19th century American poetess Emily Dickinson and the early 20th century Bohemian novelist and short story writer Franz Kafka, famously connected literature, reading and writing with a physical act of brutality and violence. If I read a book and it makes my whole body so cold, no fire ever can warm me, I know that is poetry. If I feel physically as if the top of my head were taken off, I know that is poetry. These are the only way I know it. Is there any other way?
So Maria,
yes?
Can you keep the slides also moving as you, because the slide is still there the opening slide.
Oh, really?
The painting, and then that you mentioned, the writers, Emily Dickinson, Kafka.
Okay.
If you keep moving the slides as you speak, then for others that would be better to connect. Yeah, please.
Okay. Now, can you see the slide with Dickinson?
No, it is still on the very first slide, your title slide.
No, I'll stop sharing now.
Yeah. Okay. You can share. What you can do is you can just keep clicking the next slide as you speak. For example.
Yes, I know. I clicked, but it just didn't work for you. So
okay.
I'll probably try to share only.
We can try it once again. It often happens so.
Yes. Okay. No, I got lost somewhere.
No problem, no problem. It would come on.
I just can't see the presentation there anymore. I don't know what happened. I have it here on my computer.
Okay.
When I want to share it.
Madam, you need to share so that.
Yes. Can you see it now?
It is coming on.
Yes, now it's.
Yes, we can see it now.
Okay.
So we can start. This is your fourth slide that we see.
Okay. Now
this is the surrealist painting that you were talking about.
Yes. And have you seen that one? No.
No.
Okay.
It has come up just now for the first time.
Okay.
But we can take on from Kafka. You need not interrupt yourself.
Okay.
So we are on the, I suppose, were we on the third slide with Kafka?
Yes, right. So it's this one.
Yes. Emily Dickinson and Kafka.
Yeah. So you can see the presentation clearly now, right? All of you.
But yes, clearly.
All right.
Yes,
okay, good. Okay. So I said, I read what Emily Dickinson said. So she said those words to Thomas Wentworth Higginson when he visited her in Amherst in August 1870. And in a letter from January 1904 to his friend Oscar Pollack, a German-speaking Bohemian novelist Franz Kafka wrote, and I'll quote him, "I think we ought to read only the kind of books that wound and stab us. If the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow on the head, what are we reading it for? We need the books that affect us like a disaster, that grieve us deeply, like the death of someone we loved more than ourselves, like being banished into forests far from everyone, like a suicide. A book must be the axe for the frozen sea inside us. That is my belief." For Kafka, writing and reading were serious and potentially life-changing affairs. Literature should excite us, shock us, and leave us breathless. For him, books seemed like a key to unfamiliar rooms in one's own castle. Those rooms are often cold, flooded with a frozen sea. In Kafka's view, good books can save us in case we find ourselves being isolated there. The Alchemy of Literary Pilgrimage deals with the transformations related to places connected with writers and their works. Attraction that we feel towards the places connected with the lives of authors we admire or with the setting of their works is very special and very human. According to the English author Susan Hill, the desire to find those landscapes of a great writer's imagination and once there to be affected by their unique spirit is a universal and understandable one. When we are immersed in a great novel, fired by the evocations of a great poet, we want to get under the skin of the work, somehow walk about within the books, among those people, and breathe the air of some magical, real, unreal place. We love to visit such places because there's a deep desire in men to be transformed. As we have been changed by the work we read, we may suppose that the place its author lived in, the place where the story is said or where it was written, may add a further dimension to this transformation. My today's presentation focuses on such a place. The place is in England, and many of you, I'm sure, heard about it. It is Haworth and the surrounding Bronte country, the places where the Bronte sisters lived and where they found inspiration for their work. Yet, although the image of Haworth will appear frequently in my talk, it will be only the means, not the end. Haworth will appear as a place of literary pilgrimage of two great female authors of the 20th century literature. An English modernist, Virginia Woolf, well known for her novels such as Mrs. Dalloway or To the Lighthouse, and Sylvia Plath, an American poet known for her autobiographical works, typical for their concerns with darker aspects of human existence. These two female authors are the real heroines on my today's alchemical journey, and I will try to place their visits to Haworth within the wider perspectives of their lives. Virginia Woolf, née Stephen, was a voracious reader from young age, and her taste in books was much shaped by her father, Leslie Stephen, an influential Victorian scholar who provided his daughter with books and often suggested what works may be worthy of reading. Virginia's letters and diaries reveal that as a teenager, she primarily read biographies, memoirs, histories, and classics, many of those recommended by her father, many others discovered by herself when she followed her eclectic literary tastes. Leslie Stephen had an avid interest in Charlotte Bronte. He published a long essay about her for the Cornhill magazine in 1877 and wrote an entry on the novelist for the Dictionary of Literary Biography, a project of great ambition whose first editor he became. It would be interesting to know how many 15-year-old upper middle-class girls of the late 19th century England read Charlotte Bronte's novels, but Virginia Stephen certainly did. Her diary mentions that she was reading Shirley in July and Jane Eyre in September of 1897. At that time, young Virginia had already suffered from her first mental breakdown in the summer of 1895, after her mother's death in May. In July 1897, in the midst of her reading of the novels by the eldest of the Bronte sisters, Virginia's half-sister Stella died. She was only 28. The year 1904, when Virginia visited Haworth, was also very difficult. On February the 22nd, her beloved father, Leslie Stephen, died of abdominal cancer at the age of 71, 9 years after his wife. Death in the Stephen family always paralyzed Virginia. After her father's death, she traveled with her siblings Vanessa, Toby, Adrian, and half-brother George to Italy. But on the day of their return, she had her second mental breakdown. The illness lasted for several months, from May until well into the autumn of 1904. During her stay at the home of a good friend, Violet Dickinson, Virginia attempted her first suicide by throwing herself out of the window. Her visit to the Bronte country came after all this. Virginia began to feel better in September 1904, and in November she travelled to Giggleswick, near Settle in North Yorkshire, and stayed for 10 days with the family of her cousin Will Vaughan, who worked as a headmaster of the local school. Will was married with children, and Virginia's letter to Violet Dickinson vividly describes how the Vaughan children listened to her invented stories about dogs, wolves, and horses. The tales, I quote her, which they absorb very literally and ask me all kinds of impossible questions. She was relaxed and felt perfectly well. During this stay, she made a journey to Haworth, which lies about 47 kilometers south of Giggleswick. Virginia was a true Bronte lover. And she was well familiar with an authoritative biography of Elizabeth Gaskell, The Life of Charlotte Bronte, first published in 1857, only 2 years after Charlotte's death. It is indeed Charlotte, the novelist, who is in the center of Virginia's visit to Haworth. She begins the journey in the nearby town of Keighley. And in Keighley, their only occupation, I quote, was to picture the light figure of Charlotte trotting along the streets in her thin mantle, hustled into the gutter by more burly passers-by. Getting closer to Haworth, Virginia suffered from anguish known to all readers who visit places connected with their favorite literary works and authors. Our excitement as we neared Haworth had in it an element of suspense that was really painful, as though we were to meet some long-separated friend who might have changed in the interval. So clear an image of Haworth had we from print and picture. Haworth certainly brought some disappointments to Virginia. The town itself was dingy and commonplace, the museum rather a pallid and inanimate collection of objects, and there was nothing remarkable in the house of the parsonage. Yet, there were a few exceptional moments in which Virginia felt the presence of her favorite Charlotte and her sister Emily. In case of Charlotte, it was personal items that brought her most to life. The most touching case, she wrote, is that which contains the little personal relics, the dresses and shoes of the dead woman. The natural fate of such things is to die before the body that wore them, and because these, trifling and transient though they are, have survived, Charlotte Bronte, the woman, comes to life, and one forgets the chiefly memorable fact that she was a great writer. Interestingly, Charlotte Bronte came alive for Virginia here not as a writer, but as a woman, a kindred female spirit who died prematurely at the age of 38. One other object gives a thrill, writes Virginia, the little oak stool which Emily carried with her on the solitary moorland tramps, and on which she sat, if not to write, as they say, to think, what was probably better than her writing, she wrote ironically. Emily has always been imagined as a recluse who loved, using Leslie Stephen's words, the lonely cairn and a windswept moor. a writer of genius whose prose captured the essences of human passions. Her novel Wuthering Heights finishes with the famous description of the burial place of Heathcliff, Catherine, and Catherine's husband, Edgar Linton. And Virginia Woolf also ends her journey at the burial place, that of the Bronte family. Name follows name. At very short intervals they died. Maria the mother, Maria the daughter, Elizabeth, Branwell, Emily, and Charlotte, and lastly the old father, who outlived them all. Emily was only 30 years old, and Charlotte but 9 years older. It was Violet Dickinson who suggested that Virginia should write something for Mrs. Margaret Littleton, an editor of the woman's supplement of The Guardian, a weekly newspaper for clergy. In December 1904, the newspaper published 2 Virginia's book reviews, and on the 21st of December, the essay Howarth, November 1904. Although in the letter to Violet Dickinson, Virginia admits that it took her less than 2 hours to write the essay, and she had certain doubts regarding its quality, the published text bears strong evidence of her future mastery in writing. Virginia's talent to capture the atmosphere of place, her attention to visual details, and lyrical evocations of moods are all present in the essay. Her strong love of words, the openness to reveal intimate thoughts, and a keen interest in the lives of women, it is all here. Virginia's difficult months after the death of her father in February 1904 ended in autumn. She worked with better concentration now and focused more on writing, which meant so much to her. The collaboration with The Guardian started promisingly, and when she was asked by an English historian and the Stephen family friend Frederick Maitland to assist him with his work on her father's biography, she gladly agreed. Virginia loved her father, and when he was too weak to work in November 1904, he dictated to her the last pages of his autobiography, called Mausoleum Book. She was the right person Maitland chose to cooperate with. The fact that Virginia Woolf's first published essay is a description of the literary pilgrimage may not surprise readers of her letters and diaries, in which she often gave very detailed account of places she visited. They had documentary, but also very practical function, and Virginia used them as exercises to improve her observation and writing skills. Woolf's essay about the Bronte places has a special charm because we know that its promising young author would belong to the most influential literary figures of the 20th century literature. An inspiring modernist, significant feminist, and a woman for whom life was too difficult and who ended it by her own decision in the River Ouse on the 28th of March, 1941. Now let's move on to Sylvia Plath and see how her life connects with Woolf's and how they all meet at Howarth. On the Bloomsday, the 16th of June, 1956, Sylvia Plath got married to Ted Hughes, who would become one of the greatest English poets of the 20th century. Sylvia was 23 and Ted was 25. Young writers with very promising futures who fell madly in love and got married less than 4 months after their first meeting. On Saturday, the 23rd of February, 1957, to celebrate their first meeting, Sylvia went book shopping with her husband and bought, I quote her, the blessed diary of Virginia Woolf with a battery of her novels. Plath mentions Virginia Woolf on several occasions, and it is obvious that she was much interested interested in Virginia's personality and influenced by her craft of writing. I feel my life linked to her somehow, wrote Plath about Virginia Woolf in her journal. In a letter to her mother from March 1957, Plath again mentions her closeness to Woolf. I feel very akin to her. Her mood and neuroses are amazing, and explains how Virginia's writer's diary gave her courage and supported her as a writer. You must read this diary, most illuminating, recommended Plath the book to her mother. Plath even confessed that in her own suicide attempt in August 1953, she was actually reduplicating Woolf's act from the spring of 1941. Virginia Woolf was Sylvia's model both in life and art. And those two dimensions of man's existence were neither for Woolf nor for Plath ever fully separate. This is not meant to suggest that their works are exclusively autobiographical, but rather that even the made-up parts of their fiction and poetry were written as if they were experiences fully lived through, painfully processed in their minds and hearts. Her poems were images of herself, wrote Erika Wagner about Sylvia Plath, created by turning what she saw when she looked inward towards the outside world, a desperately revelatory process. If one writes with such an emotional truthfulness, it is impossible to keep life apart. The love between Sylvia Plath and Ted Hughes was one of the most tragic kind that the two great artists living together can experience. Their marriage was meant to be a union of kindred spirits. Sylvia had always been interested in shadows, mirrors, and reflections. Her senior thesis was a psychological interpretation of the image of the double in Dostoevsky, and she firmly believed that in Ted Hughes she found, miraculously, the male counterpart of herself. They shared great passion for literature and wanted to dedicate their lives fully to the art of writing. Their marriage began with a long honeymoon, a combination of work and pleasure in Spain in a small fishing village called Benidorm on the Mediterranean coast. Soon after their Spanish holiday, the couple traveled to Heptonstall in West Yorkshire, in England, to see Ted's parents, who at that time didn't know that their youngest child got already married. Sylvia liked Edith and William Hughes, dear, simple Yorkshire folk, and enjoyed her stay in Ted's Wuthering Heights home. Wuthering Heights was indeed not very far, and for the two literature lovers, the visit to the romantic locations connected with the Bronte sisters, especially Howarth and Withens, was almost a necessity. Heptonstall, where Hughes's parents lived, is a large village situated about 16 kilometers from Howarth. In a letter to her mother, Sylvia described how on Friday, the 31st of August, Ted's uncle Walt took the couple to Withens, a ruined farmhouse lying about 5 kilometers southwest of Howarth. Many readers of Emily Bronte devotedly believe that Withens is Wuthering Heights, the model for the Earnshaw family house, although not much resemblance is there between the actual house, the ruins of which can you still visit today, and the Earnshaw dwelling described by Emily Bronte in her book. "How can I tell you how wonderful it is?" wrote Sylvia to her mother. "Imagine yourself on top of the world, with all the purplish hills curving away, and grey sheep grazing with horns curling, and black demonic faces and yellow eyes. Black walls of stone, clear streams from which we drank, and at last a lonely, deserted black stone house, broken down, clinging to the windy side of a hill. Plath described a fairyland, the country which, though beautiful to behold, possesses an almost subliminal sense of darkness, sorrow, and doom. Sylvia's journal describes Withens and compares it favorably with Howarth. Most people never get there, writes Plath about Withens, the location which could only be reached on foot. Instead, she notes, visitors to the Bronte country prefer Howarth, with the Church of St. Michael and All Angels, the black stone rectory's room of memorabilia, wooden cradle, Charlotte's bridal crown of heirloom lace and honeysuckle, Emily's death couch, the small luminous books and watercolors, the beaded napkin ring, the apostle cupboard. They touched this, wore that, wrote here in a house redolent with ghosts. The end of quote. Physical evidence, objects and clothes make the presence of the Bronte sisters real for many readers. But it is the windswept moors, its bleak, wild and untamed nature, which attracted Plath much more. House of love lasts as long as love in human mind, wrote Plath, contemplating the ruined house of Withens. Although the love which inspired Emily Bronte to write her story of Heathcliff and Catherine might have never existed, Withens has always evoked powerful feelings in Bronte's readers because the remains of the farm are still there, the curious evidence of something which might have never happened. Although Plath had read Wuthering Heights before, she read the book in Haptonstall again. This time, the story really felt different, she wrote. The actual setting of the tragic love, one of the most famous in English fiction, happened to be part of the country where her husband grew up and which he knew so well. She could experience it now with her own sensibility. It all created a unique emotional circumstance. Visit to the Bronte country was inspiring and important for Plath. She made a sketch of the Withens ruin and transformed her experience of the Wuthering Heights setting into poetry, in her poems such as Wuthering Heights or Two Views of Withens. She used its background also in her short story All the Dead Dears, and published an account of her visit to Withens in the Christian Science Monitor in June 1959. Sylvia Plath admired Emily Bronte, and when she was expecting her second child, which she unfortunately miscarried in February 1961, she wanted her daughter to be called Megan Emily. And I quote her, "The Emily is a feminizing of Dedit's Emil, and also for Emily Dickinson and Emily Bronte," she wrote. The relationship between Ted Hughes and Sylvia Plath began to deteriorate in the summer of 1962. Plath's mother, Aurelia, visited them in their beautiful house in Devon, where they had been living since September 1961. When she was leaving at the beginning of July, she knew that there was a great tension between the couple and that the marriage was in crisis. She didn't know, however, that she would never see her daughter again. Although Plath, in her letters to her mother, tried to be cheerful during these difficult months of the winter of 1962, her days got darker. She loved her children, a 2-year-old Frida and Nicholas, who was born in January 1962. She loved her writing, which she did very early in the mornings, since during the day there were always other worries and responsibilities. She lived on her poetry during the last months of her life, wrote Elizabeth Hardwick in her essay on Sylvia Plath. Plath was most productive between 4 a.m. and 8 a.m., during the hours of the dawn, when the children were still sleeping and her mind could concentrate on what she thought was her most meaningful purpose, to write what it felt like to be her. On February the 11th, 1963, she could bear life no more and Plath killed herself. She was only 30, the same age as Emily Bronte when she died in 1848. Plath was buried in Heptonstall, just 16 kilometers from Haworth. In order to express verbally what is too painful to say, the mankind has invented poetry. Only poetic language can use images which translate authors' emotions and feelings so that these can be shared and felt by others. In such simple way, communication in art takes place. Ted Hughes published his intimate collection of poetry, Birthday Letters, the poems for and about Sylvia Plath, in 1998. It was his last book, described by Christopher Reid as intimate speech raised to the level of art. Hughes's poetic autobiography is a history of his relationship with Plath, a book which is touching even without readers' knowledge of the biographical background. There is a poem about their honeymoon in Spain, about a Ouija board which they liked to consult, about horoscopes, Ted's lifelong obsession, and several poems in the collection mention Sylvia's father. There is also a poem called Wuthering Heights, albeit very different from the one written by Plath. Her piece is meditative, lyrical, impressionistic, and difficult to paraphrase. Hughes's poem is, on the contrary, a much more concrete account of their visit to Withens in the first year of their marriage. Hughes recalls how Withens, Emily's private Eden, impressed Sylvia. I quote, "It was all novel and exhilarating to you. The book becoming a map, Wuthering Heights withering into perspective. There, in the country of the Yorkshire moors, reality met fiction in an extraordinary way, and Plath enjoyed it to the fullest." The character of Emily Bronte clearly dominates Hughes's poem. Her name is mentioned 7 times, often in comparison with Plath. "Weren't you twice as ambitious as Emily?" asks Hughes. "What would stern, dour Emily have made of your frisky glances and your huge hope, your huge mortgage of hope?" Poems in the collection contain many questions. "What can I tell you that you do not know of the life after death?" asks Hughes. It is a death-defying monologue, an attempt to connect, striving after presence, even if the presence is only that of a ghost. "Did you appear to tap at my dark window?" asks Hughes in the poem, which is not in Birthday Letters, but which was likely meant to be included, as its draft was discovered in the notebook with other poems which Hughes chose for publication in the collection. The poem that became available only in October 2010, thanks to Hughes's wife Carol, is known as Last Letter and speaks about the weekend when Sylvia Plath committed suicide. A ghost tapping at the window is just one of its many powerful and disturbing images. Like an apparition of Edgar Allan Poe's Lost Lenore, or Catherine Earnshaw's ghost who wished to enter the house through a window in Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, a ghost of Sylvia Plath has been haunting her family and readers ever since that sad Monday morning of 11th of February, 1963. Since I still have some time left, and since I strongly believe that the most powerful is the voice of the poet herself, I would like to read to you one poem by Sylvia Plath. Now this will be an exercise for your attention span because it's quite long, but it's worthy of it. The poem is called Tulips. Some of you may know it. Of course, flowers are ever favorite motive in poetry. In this case, however, they appear in a strange hospital setting, and they become a means through which the speaker's mind, her anxieties, fears, and views of life are expressed. So let's listen to Sylvia Plath's voice. The tulips are too excitable. It is winter here. Look how white everything is, how quiet, how snowed in. I'm learning peacefulness, lying by myself quietly as the light lies on these white walls, this bed, these hands. I'm nobody. I have nothing to do with explosions. I have given my name and my day clothes up to the nurses, and my history to the anaesthetist, and my body to surgeons. They have propped my head between the pillow and the sheet cuff, like an eye between two wide lids that will not shut. Stupid pupil, it has to take everything in. The nurses pass and pass. They are no trouble. They pass the way gulls pass inland in their white caps, doing things with their hands, one just the same as another. So it is impossible to tell how many there are. My body is a pebble to them. They tend it as water tends to the pebbles it must run over, smoothing them gently. They bring me numbness in their bright needles. They bring me sleep. Now I have lost myself. I'm sick of baggage. My patent leather overnight case like a black pillbox. My husband and child smiling out of the family photo. Their smiles catch onto my skin, little smiling hooks. I have let things slip, a 30-year-old cargo boat stubbornly hanging onto my name and address. They have swapped me clear of my loving associations. Scared and bare on the green plastic pillow trolley, I watched my tea set, my bureaus of linen, my books sink out of sight, and the water went over my head. I am a nun now. I have never been so pure. I didn't want any flowers. I only wanted to lie with my hands turned up and be utterly empty. How free it is. You have no idea how free. The peacefulness is so big it dazes you. And it asks nothing, a name tag, a few trinkets. It is what the dead close on, finally. I imagine them shutting their mouths on it, like a communion tablet. The tulips are too red in the first place. They hurt me. Even through the gift paper, I could hear them breathe, lightly, through their white swaddlings like an awful baby. Their redness talks to my wound, it corresponds. They are subtle, they seem to float, though they weigh me down, upsetting me with their sudden tons and their color, a dozen red lead sinkers round my neck. Nobody watched me before, now I am watched. The tulips turn to me and the window behind me, where once a day the light slowly widdens and slowly thins. And I see myself, flat, ridiculous, a cut paper shadow between the eye of the sun and the eyes of the tulips, and I have no face. I have wanted to efface myself. The vivid tulips eat my oxygen. Before they came, the air was calm enough, coming and going, breath by breath, without any fuss. Then the tulips filled it up like a loud noise. Now the air snags and eddies round them the way a river snags and eddies round a sunken, rust-red engine. They concentrate my attention that was happy playing and resting without committing itself. The walls also seem to be warming themselves. The tulips should be behind bars like dangerous animals. They're opening like the mouth of some great African cat. And I'm aware of my heart. It opens and closes its bowl of red blooms out of sheer love of me. The water I taste is warm and salt, like the sea, and comes from a country far away as health. The poem finishes with the word health, a key word of today, both mental health and physical health. We have learned in recent times that how much they go hand in hand. Because of the pandemic, our opportunities to visit the places connected with the lives of authors and their works were reduced to minimum. We have become mental travelers, which is not necessarily a bad thing. As many of us know, the explorations of inner worlds are as vital for our lives as the explorations of external world. Still, I hope that we all have soon a chance to travel and visit many beautiful places. Those related to the lives and works of authors are particularly interesting to explore. When I began my talk, I said it would contain everything I like about literature and books. And after I presented the stories of two authors with very sad and tragic lives, I think we need to end with something optimistic and positive. One of the most wonderful things about people is their diversity. We are different, and each of us has a different life story in which happiness meets with pain and anxiety in a different way. Good literature expresses both positive but also difficult aspects of our existence. But above all, it should always bring hope and vision to our lives. Only with them, human beings can flourish. So thank you for your attention. And now I'll be really glad if we had some nice discussion about places, literary pilgrimages, about Plath's poem, or about anything else you would be interested in.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I'll stop sharing the presentation.
Yeah. So see, it went off pretty well. It went off rather nicely. I would ask young students especially to note how beautiful is your reading of a poem, how beautifully you read with such a lot of emotion at the correct places, the pauses, which makes the text come alive so much. So it was really a wonderful session with the end of such a beautiful poem. I would just first throw open the session to interaction, which we ought to have after such a beautiful presentation, such a meaningful presentation. So if people can unmute themselves and interact with Dr. Maria, that would be the best, rather than typing your questions or observations. If network is good with you, you can unmute yourself and really put forward your observations, comments, and questions. Please.
So may I, meantime, the students can take some time to settle and come up with just first of
Yeah,
all,
this
of
is
course,
my colleague in the department, Professor Jhala. Please, sir.
yes. Very good afternoon, ma'am. It's afternoon here. So yes, not just recitation, but the whole of your presentation was like a song, in fact. And this reminds me of, and I would like to just add, not just for you, but readers who are interested, and the way you could connect Plath, Virginia Woolf, and Bronte with place and the works. Today itself, I had a session with the students wherein uh, it was, of course, Oscar Wilde we were discussing and the ballad, and I spoke of your presentation as a song, probably for the same reason. And therein, I did caught in the class, and I would like to, when you say place, in pen, pencil, and prison, Oscar Wilde takes note of art or literature as true harmony of all that is beautiful, irrespective of age or place or school or manner. Now, with a song, Sylvia Plath wrote a poem in 46, I suppose, which was not included in her collection, and that is Mad Girl's Love Song. And with the same title, you have Mad Girl's Love Song, Sylvia Plath and Life Before Ted. That's written by Andrew Wilson. And I happen to, at random, probably luckily, I came across a work that is Mad Girl's Love Song. So the same title travels or takes up, and this is by Indian author Rukmani Bhaiya Nair. That is Mad Girl's Love Song. And just a little brief, I know I should not take much time, and this is available online, but uh, it speaks of cultural collide, and when does these angels clash, and it draws a trajectory and also the literary history from Donne to Sylvia Plath, and speaks about madness of the central character there, Pari, and a beautifully done fictional work it is by Rukmani Bhaiya Nair, and of course it's based on the schizophrenia, paranoid schizophrenia of the central character there. It would be interesting for the students as well as we teachers to connect this with what you spoke of in case of two writers. Thank you for such a good, such a well worked out presentation. Thank you, madam.
Thank you for these suggestions. It's also very good. That's why I ask it participants to connect, because it's very good to know or to find out how the talk can be extended to other spheres. So what you suggested is very good. I'll definitely look that up. It sounds very, very interesting, the connections with Plath and so on. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Good morning from Slovakia.
First of all, many compliments for a very nice talk. I enjoyed it a lot, and I really like the topic, the alchemy of literary pilgrimage, and it reminds me of a typical Indian tradition, because in ancient India, and also I would say in medieval India, literary pilgrimage, that is the places, the other things associated with writers have always remained places of pilgrimage. And people, even common people, if I give the recent example, then Tagore, wherever Tagore stayed, wherever he lived, whatever he saw, in fact, people even today feel like going and visiting, whether it's Aurobindo or Mira or Kabir, Tulsidas, whosoever. And even if you go back, then Valmiki, Vyas, whatever is associated with them, in fact, seeing them happens to be something worth desiring. Because a poet is given the highest place in India, in Indian, I would say in ancient Indian traditions. Because a poet is next to God, they say, because he is also a creator. I mean, my point was that this was something good, that how two very significant authors visit the places with a certain other author, and then they explore what common reader might not have explored themselves. The way texts are facilitated by critics, in the same way here, other creative writers are exploring the hidden meanings of the landscapes. That is something very appealing. I have one question which slightly counters this. What I want to ask is that normally literature has to give spirit of life. It has to generate hope in life. And here, these two authors are visiting a place which are the places where people have suffered a lot. So, is it because of that that rather than finding some hope out of those places of pilgrimage, in fact, they found just opposite of it?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. The way how happiness or our well-being connect with pain and suffering in life. It's definitely true that life contains both. And it's important, as I said at the end of my talk, that art also explores both. Because when we read about pain or suffering of others, I think it may often help us to understand our own feelings of anxiety or fear or suffering better. So it is as if we, to some extent, as if we went through the same. And since they verbalize it in the form of art, art is not literal. It's based on connotations. It's based on associations. So art gives us a wonderful sphere in which the pain that we feel can be processed in such a way that we would feel relieved or somehow healed afterwards. That I see this to be a great potential of poetry also, especially poetry. I'm very keen on poetry, reading poetry, discussing poetry. I strongly believe that we grow both as readers and as human beings if we talk about poetry with others. I know that poetry, reading poetry is very much personal experience. It's important to experience it personally, but also discussions in communities, in groups, in classes are vitally important, because when we learn the perspective of the other person, it can again enrich our own perspective. I don't know whether I answered your question, maybe partially. So it goes hand in hand, and through the art of someone else, our own pains and suffering can be somehow solved or eased.
Thank you very much.
There is a hand raised by Dhara Chotai, Dr. Dhara Chotai from Central University, Gandhinagar, is it?
Yes, sir.
Please.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Good afternoon to all my teachers first. Jala sir, Mukherjee sir, Mehta sir. I'm so glad to hear you all and see also. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am, for this wonderful lecture. It took me back to my past days when I used to listen to my teachers. It was as graceful, as I used to listen to my teachers. So it was an amazing experience. Thank you. Um, I have a question which relates with understanding the word pilgrimage. Uh, right from Chaucer, like, see, if we look at his Canterbury Tales and the way he uses the word pilgrimage as a trope to understand as to how, the very first line when he talks about the creation. So the creation itself, the idea of world comes in place through the idea of word as such. That's how Chaucer talks about creation in the beginning, and that's where pilgrimage is also used as a kind of trope to understand this journey from word to world. Now I was thinking, how do these women poets deal with this kind of engagement? Does the idea of word in relation to world figure out in the same way in the poems of these poets or not? And probably I assume that for women poets it would be a different equation altogether. Right from Chaucer, if we move forward, even during Renaissance, we see in texts like Hamlet, Faustus, even Don Quixote, how these writers, these characters have engaged with the relation of word vis-a-vis world. So, how is it distinct for these two women poets? That how do they relate this situation, and how do they engage with this, and how do they use pilgrimage as a trope to understand this engagement?
Yeah. Oh, that's a very complex question. Yes. Thank you for mentioning historical overview of the significance of pilgrimage. I will say a few things to that. I definitely won't give you the full answer, I'm sure, but I will just mention a few things that I would like to. First of all, the word pilgrimage, as you said, is used in different contexts. I used it in my talk because very often when you read experiences of people who visited places connected with writers, they frequently talk about them as the journeys, after them pilgrimages. Pilgrimage is definitely the term related to the religious context. We visit places of worship, to worship a saint or we visit some sacred place, so to speak. When the word is used in this secular context, for me, it implies that there is something special about the place that is felt both by the person who visits the place and also by all the visitors to the place, that there is some kind of special atmosphere in it that is there because the person, the author, lived there, or the place is the setting of the novel is at that place. Now, talking about Virginia Woolf and Sylvia Plath and this context, I'm not sure whether there has been a book or a work that would have tackled with the concept of traveling or journeys in their life, but it would be very interesting to explore how the places that they visited or where they lived, what kind of impact the places had on their life. Now, I selected this place, Howarth. I found it basically by accident. It all started with reading letters of writers, and I noticed a nice pattern between the life of Virginia Woolf and Sylvia Plath, and they somehow connected at Haworth, at the Bronte place. It is just one event from their life. I mean, for Virginia Woolf, as I said, she wrote her first essay about her visit to Haworth. For her, it contributed much. I think for her, it was some kind of evidence that she could write. It was her first published essay. She published 2 books reviews, but then there was this essay. And it came after a very difficult period of her life. So it brought some kind of refreshment, new energy that supported her, that gave her strength to write and to go on living. As I said, it was in 1904 when her father died. And we know that she had very intense mental issues later on. But I would see this essay, maybe it's just my personal, very subjective perspective, but as an important impetus in her life as a writer. So the play somehow contributed to her development as the author. And as far as Sylvia Plath is concerned, again, I said that the place was very much connected with her life with Ted Hughes. That's why I also incorporated biographical context and information, because it's quite important to understand the context, to understand her visit to Howarth and Withens. And again, I mentioned that she read Wuthering Heights before, and when she visited the place, she experienced the book as if anew. It shows us, it tells us something about the way how we read and how we experience texts, that it very much depends on the place where we read it, the conditions that we are in. Now for Sylvia Plath, the conditions were almost ideal. She was in the midst of love of her life. She was in the place of one of her favorite books. She was there in the nature that she really loved and she felt very good in. So all those circumstances contributed to her well-being and to her positive feeling of the place. And then it's very interesting to see how that very same visit turns into something slightly different in Ted Hughes' poem from his last collection, when the memories become as if a sort of means to cope with the death of his wife. I didn't want to include details of her intimate life. I think there's a certain border that we should keep in talking about writers' lives. So there are some things that I'm sure you might have read about, but they are not necessary to know for the context of Ted Hughes' poem. But definitely the place, as he experienced it with Plath, gave him inspiration to say something about their relationship, about their painful relationship after her death. So for me, the magic of the place lies in its potential power to be so many different things for different people. As I said before, this is a very, very complex question. It would be interesting to study it in depth and to see it in a wider context, even with other places they visited. So thank you for suggesting this. It's a great inspiration for some future research. So thank you for saying that.
Thank you, sir.
Well, I thank Maria, of course, but our old student Dhara also, who resurfaced, talking about surfacing and women writers after so many years, should I say, because of this program. So this speaks of the interest that has generated amongst our alumni, that somebody who was here in our department a long time ago is in her own right an independent and assured scholar now in a university department, connects back in this way. You were talking about us not being able to travel. This is the simulacrum of traveling and meeting and reconnecting. Thank you, both of you, both Tara and Maria. Did I see a hand from Sapna? Yes, Vishwaraj, I note that you have a hand, but I think Sapna raised a hand, Anil Kumar raised a hand, and who has now left the meeting. But if he comes back, and then Vishwaraj has also raised his hand. So Sapna, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Good evening, ma'am.
It is morning for her.
Okay, sorry. Good morning, ma'am.
It's okay.
Firstly, I would like to thank you for this amazing session. And I think we all would have an opinion that you are blessed with such a beautiful voice. And it was such a blessing that we could hear from you. Like, we literally loved the way you recited that poem. And one thing that I don't have a doubt kind of a thing, but I have observed it that literature, we have always been taught that literature is therapeutic. It is like a therapy, you can let out your emotions by reading or by writing and etc. But I have observed it, and personally in my case, that I always get, I always like all the things which are very sad, which are gloomy, and all the gothic elements. Like Wuthering Heights, I was always fascinated by Wuthering Heights. And today, when you mentioned that Wuthering Heights is the Virginia Woolf's favorite and Sylvia Plath and everything, it was a good thing. But I just want to have an opinion of yours, that why is it such a thing that people who have so many things in their mind, they all like gloomy things. In spite of being such renowned names in literature, they suffer from mental illness and all those things. Why is literature not helping them?
Once again, the last sentence. Why?
Why is literature not helping them?
Oh, why is literature not helping them? Yeah, because you have the impression that even though people read text, they still suffer, right? Or?
Yes, ma'am. They read, they write, they do so many things.
Oh my God. That's a very, very philosophical and difficult question. One answer that would come to me is that maybe they haven't found still the right work. So there is always a chance that you will discover a poem that would really speak to you and that would answer your question. That's what I love about literature, that you always learn new things, and there are so many great poems to discover and talk about. Another thing is that, it goes back again to our humanity, that while we are here on this earth, I think if we are not saints, we will not be ever fully happy or satisfied. There are always some kind of external influences, and literature can help to a certain extent, definitely, but it's not a remedy for all, I would say. Literature and poetry is a great help. It's been mentioned before. It's used in therapy. It is frequently used in therapy, and therapeutic effects have been proven, but still there are limitations in all kinds of remedy. So my advice would be to go on searching, go on exploring, and I'm sure if we invest enough time and energy into reading poetry and discovering its secrets and mysteries, we will find answers to our questions.
Thank you, ma'am. That was quite satisfying.
Good. And you will keep discovering. Sapna is a young student in our department currently, and a good mind, as you could make out from the question itself. Pretty deep metaphysical undertones to the question, but one has to discover things counter to the examples that one might find which might be slightly depressing. For example, in the context of British and American literature, I was reminded of Emerson's literary pilgrimage to England when he made it, for example. And so that is the counter example, if I may cite. When he made his pilgrimage in early 1830s, he was himself not in a very good frame of mind. His wife had died. He was doubting his profession as a pastor, and he himself was not very well known as a writer. On his second visit, he was his fame had preceded him, but this is the first one that and he had visited England specifically to meet Carlyle, Wordsworth, and Coleridge. There was a fourth person, I forget. 4 people he had. So it was a kind of a pilgrimage that, not in a very good mental state, he makes a pilgrimage from America to England. He meets these people. And in your talk, Maria, you mentioned that sometimes when we go with a lot of over expectation, we are slightly frustrated when we reach the place or meet the person. This thing happened the same for Emerson. But he used that thing in a way that if these great people like Wordsworth and Coleridge by then were very well known, and if he is personally disappointed with the meeting, then he can restart once again, and in a way, a kind of a negative influence he picked up from them, and goes back to America, starts his life anew, and then Emerson becomes a historical figure. So this is also something that, as we discuss, that people have been not so rejuvenated or motivated, or they have been sad or depressed. But there are counter examples to that too. Thank you, Sapna, and of course, Maria. I saw a hand from, is Mr. Anil Kumar there? He did raise a hand, but is he there, Anil Kumar? There is, however, a question from Vishwaraj. He is also a student right now in our department. Vishwaraj, please ask your question.
Yes, thank you, sir. So since we are talking about experience and biographical elements and impact of them on the writing, I just have this one paradoxical question about writing itself. Can I put it in the chat box so everyone can read it, if I may?
Why not ask it? I ask it. Everybody can listen. Please ask.
Okay, sir. I just have this observation followed by a question that be it Woolf or Plath or be it Hemingway and Van Gogh, that all of them lived a devastating life, evidently, and then gave us some enigmatically captivating works and paintings and all that. So I want to ask that to what degree do you think that this sadness or melancholy was an essential element for them, or to what extent do you agree with this statement that what is bad for the heart is good for the art?
Oh, Professor Mukherjee, you have excellent students. All right. Yeah, again, very, very difficult question. You are asking the thing that I think it's almost impossible to answer. I would probably begin from a different perspective. This part, the lecture that I presented to you today, is one part of the book that I've been working on for some time. It's about the way how reality connects with fiction, how the world that we experience connects with imaginary or imagined worlds created by authors. And there is a chapter in my book in which I'm dealing with my sources. And my sources are basically life writing. Life writing includes letters, biographies, autobiographies. So it means writing that is either about the author or by the author. And then there is that question, to what extent do you connect the life with the work? It is the question that has been asked many, many times. There are radically different views depending on where you stay in the approach to criticism and to your interpretation and reading of literature. But I personally believe that the life writing can help us to understand works better. The adjective better is not probably the correct one, but it may give us an insight which we wouldn't have if we didn't know the biographical information. We as human beings, we tend to be interested in aspects connected with real life more than with aspects that are fictional. In general, people prefer experiences that are based on something actual to experiences that are completely made up. The fascination with places and the lives of authors is related to that also, that we are always interested in or at least many readers are interested in the background information. We feel that if we know more about the life of the author, that it would give us certain insight into his or her work also. Now, if we are talking about the authors who suffered or who still suffer from depression, mental illnesses, etc., etc., and to see how their experience is reflected in their work. It's all connected to what I already said about the way how the inner worlds are reflected in our verbal expression. Now, Professor Mukherjee mentioned American literature. There was a great American poet, I'm sure most of you are very well familiar with, Walt Whitman, who in his great poetry collection, Leaves of Grass, he has there a poem in which he writes about biography. He is writing about, there is some kind of question that how can someone write his biography if he doesn't understand himself? That we are mysteries to ourselves. Now, if you ask it yourself, that question, to what extent would be your writing connected with your life, it would be very, very difficult to explore. So to answer your question, how is it all connected? We will never have full answers, but we may get to answers that would help us understand text better and to somehow connect the text with our lives better. I don't know if this answers your question, but you are giving me so philosophical questions. We would need a whole seminar whole semester to get to the answer.
In a way, these questions sometimes cannot be answered, and that is what literature also informs us, that questions are more important. Sometimes answers are pretty superficial. They don't really satisfy us. So yes, and of course, the thing that you pointed out, once during the days of heydays of new criticism, it was thought that personal information should not be taken into consideration for criticism. But we have come well beyond those days. And certainly they give a very interesting and fresh dimension to our understanding of authors, artists, and the likes. Thank you. I see there's a hand from Pratiksha. We will take one or two questions now because it is, as you can see, the session has stretched for an hour and a half. But certainly, Pratiksha has raised a hand, and Pratiksha is right now a junior faculty in our department. Pratiksha.
Actually, sir, actually, this is me, Hena, handling the session. So
Okay,
I
sorry,
had raised,
Hena.
I am using it from the two devices. I
Please,
have
please.
just an observation to make as far as what kind of questions literature or art makes us, do. As you have already mentioned that art or literature, it does, invoke us, provoke us to question things, but the answers we may never understand, we may never be able to find. And I think in the process of unraveling those answers, we learn something. And then when you finally, if you happen to find an answer, maybe it won't matter that much, but the process that leads you to find that answer is something that I think literature teaches us to do. So art would make you make you question things, but the answers, they will be rhetorical, metaphysical, philosophical, very abstract things that you might never reach out to them. Okay, that was the observation that I had in mind. And thank you very much, madam, for your wonderful lecture. It was really a fruitful experience to listen to you.
Thank you for your ideas and thoughts. I really appreciate them. Yeah, just to add a few words to what you said. And it will be, maybe I'll go back to the previous question also in my answer. Questions are vitally important. And it's very important also to know what kind of answers do we need. Whether we need to learn something about the author, or actually whether we need to learn something about ourselves through reading. Because there are different motivations for readers and different ways how we can explore literary works. You may try to find the truth about Hemingway's soul, about Whitman's heart, or about Virginia Woolf's mind. And through that search, you may find something very exciting, maybe disturbing about yourself also. So it's fascinating how it's all connected. And basically we end up, the pilgrimage ends all the time with us. It should end up with ourselves, and we should be changed by art. So thank you for your comments.
Well, early into your talk, you did quote Kafka and Emily Dickinson talking about that violent stirring that that literature does to us, and if it doesn't unsettle us, then it is not literature. So probably even that, not knowing the answer, or knowing what we do not know, probably not knowing right now, but knowing what we do not know can also be one way of looking at it. I think we have had a very fruitful session with you, Dr. Maria, and we will keep thinking about it, revisiting it. We will play this recording, we will share it, and a beautiful beginning has been initiated between our two departments, and wider, as I just said, that it has brought in our alumni who left the department quite a few years ago. I see that there were a few people from your side too. They were listening to your talk, and so it has been a really very fruitful session for all of us. And we would like to continue this memorandum of understanding between both our departments, our people, our students, and there would be regular interaction between us we would be informing everyone about it, and we should carry this very, very interesting dialogue forward on different aspects, on different topics. So thank you on behalf of the department, this university, Saurashtra University, all of us. Dr. Maria, thank you very much for this wonderful talk of yours.
Thank you, Sanjay, for all those lovely words. I'm really looking forward to your lectures, yours and your colleagues in September or October. We will manage all the details. I'm especially looking forward to teaching experience, because the part of agreement says that we should have courses for students of our institution. So it would be very, very nice experience, I think, for both sides. Thank you for organizing this event. It was a pleasure to meet all of you, and I hope we once meet in person. This virtual space has its positive aspects, but it has certainly some limitations. So I'll be really happy to meet you once in person and discuss literature in person.
Let's really be hopeful about it. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Very
Bye-bye.
goodbye. Very
Thank
goodbye.
you. Thank you.